Então, galera, essa semana, na verdade, na semana que vem, a gente vai ter o lançamento, na verdade, não é o lançamento, de um dos jogos mais esperados dos últimos anos. Olha, o hype tá um negócio absurdo, que é o Path of Exile 2, tá? Pra quem não sabe, ele é um action RPG que começou como um sucessor espiritual do Diablo 2, né? Basicamente, eram fãs do Diablo 2 que queriam trazer de volta aquela sensação, aquele gameplay do Diablo 2, porque eles achavam que Diablo 3 não tinha feito esse bom serviço, e não fez realmente, né? Lançaram o Path of Exile 1, e essa semana, tá? Depende de quando você está assistindo esse vídeo, mas no dia 6, né? Dia 6 de dezembro, a gente vai ter o acesso antecipado, tá? E, obviamente, eu vou jogar o jogo. Eu já tive a oportunidade de jogar lá na BGS. Foi super épico, foi super maneiro. Eu gostei pra caramba. Pra mim, pelo pouco que eu joguei, ele parece muito mais interessante do que o próprio Diablo 4. O jogo é grátis, mas pra jogar no acesso antecipado, você tem que comprar um dos pacotes do jogo, né? E uma das grandes dúvidas que eu tenho é qual classe que eu vou jogar o Path of Exile 2, tá? Galera, eu joguei muito pouco Path of Exile 1. Eu tenho uma ideia das classes, mas vamos dar uma olhada aqui no vídeo para ver as 12 classes que vão ter no acesso antecipado. Só uma coisa, tá? No acesso antecipado não vai vir o jogo completo. Não vem todas as classes, não vem todas as classes acendidas, que é uma evolução da sua classe, não vem todos os mapas, não vem todos os bosses, então é literalmente um acesso antecipado mesmo, tá? Mas vamos dar uma olhada aqui nesse vídeo para ver as classes, para ver se eu consigo decidir qual classe eu vou achar mais interessante para jogar aqui, e eu também vou querer saber a opinião de vocês. Então vamos lá, galera. Esse vídeo aqui é do site, é do canal Rage Games Video, que é um canal super grande que me foi indicado. Eita! 900 likes, 340 dislikes. O pessoal não tá gostando, não? O que aconteceu aqui? Ah, só para pessoal que não saiba, apenas 6 das classes vão estar disponíveis no lançamento do jogo. Vamos ver! Me indicaram um vídeo aqui, tô vendo aqui que o pessoal tá meio revoltado com o vídeo, mas vamos lá. Opa, tá sem som. E galera, antes de continuar, falar rapidamente com vocês sobre um parceiro aqui do canal, que é o Exile. O Exile é o melhor programa de redução de latência que trabalha para diminuir o MS, o ping dos seus jogos online. E você nunca mais perder aquela partida de PVP ou morrer naquela raid no PvE porque a sua latência estava alta ou porque você estava com perda de pacote. E aqui no Codex você pode ter o Exit Lag com 20% de desconto. O que você vai ter que fazer? Aqui embaixo tem um link, você vai clicar no link e vai usar o cupom LORDMONS. Só isso, galera. E o Exit Lag, ele funciona para computadores, consoles e até celulares. Pode usar nos seus MMOs asiáticos do celular ou nos seus FPS, no console e também no celular, tudo na mesma conta. E além disso, você não precisa acreditar em mim, porque você pode testar de graça e não precisa colocar o seu cartão de crédito. Basta clicar no link, criar sua conta, e eu sei que vocês vão gostar, e na hora que for comprar, coloca lá o cupom LORDMONS para vocês terem aquele desconto, tá bom? Então, muito obrigado para todo mundo que tá usando e muito obrigado para todo mundo que vai usar. Clica no link e usa o cupom LORDMONS. Valeu, galera! O vídeo vai estar em inglês, mas aqui embaixo vai estar aquela legendinha pra gente, tá? Vamos lá.
First Path of Exile 2 video. In the lead up, Cotton has been able to join other creators to play the game early, and now I'm jumping in myself to talk about the 12 classes of the upcoming release. There's a lot more than the original game, which was just 7 by comparison, though having said that, it appears we're aware of 8 in good detail, with the remaining 4 being pretty well known ones from the original game. Not to mention, there's also the concept of ascendancy, so those are subclasses for each and every class. So the main class chooses between 3 subclasses to then work into those are ascendancies. Also in PoE 2, we have the new dual specialization system, letting you work in 2 different kind of skill tree setups to swap between when you swap weapons. All of that might sound intimidating, so I just want to give you a video that gives you a kind of base idea of a class and its vibe, the main options and concepts, so you can go in with an idea of what you might want to look into more first. So to begin with, I need to tell you about the classes of Path of Exile and how they're a little bit weird. It's entirely possible to create a spellcasting warrior, despite that being backwards in the nature of the concept. Any class can use any skill in the game, as well as the entire list of weapons, so that's why it's possible. There are some restrictions you need to fill to achieve that, but it's just that there's no lock preventing you from doing that if you want. So classes in Path of Exile are essentially just your starting point in that big skill tree. They define your class in a straightforward and obvious way. And if you want to be a warrior to just be a warrior, then that's going to be a great way to achieve that class fantasy. You'll just start the skill tree in the strength section, which naturally will be closer to the passives that are going to enhance gameplay tied to that concept. But it's also possible for your warrior to then transition into other build concepts, maybe not typically warrior in theme. It's just one of the really cool core features of the game that I guess I need to highlight for a video like this. So let's now run down the list. Now, like I said, 4 of the 12 aren't currently shown in any proper depth and detail. We do have a lot to say for the other 8, but again, the 4 that are less shown are ones we kind of know about from PoE 1 anyway.
Como chamou a oferta de Black Friday da NordVPN? De oferta Black Friday.
KASPERSKY.
So starting with the strength classes, we have Warrior and Marauder, which somewhat blend into each other more than other classes right now. It seems the Warrior is going to take parts of the original Marauder and goes a different direction with it. And I think this looks like a very beginner-friendly version of that concept, since you're going to deal great damage while dealing your own, kind of being pretty tanky to forgive those mistakes. So the Warrior is a more straightforward class, physical damage with heavy hits, and a lot of stunning capabilities. It's also going to be very tanky and mostly a melee fighter, though we have seen things enhanced with fire, using volcanic fissures to spread out bursts of fire that reactivate with fire on full uses. But compared to the original Marauder, it looks a lot more mobile, moving forward with momentum during many of the attacks. So naturally, I'll expect ascendancies that increase survivability, control, or just raw damage output. On the other hand, for pure strength, we have the Marauder, which was the original pure strength class of PoE 1. Separating this from the warrior class seems a bit more vague, like I said, especially with what we've seen on this, which is very little. But from the original concept, we can look at the ascendancies, allowing you to become the
O Marauder, se eu não estou enganado, ela não vai estar disponível no lançamento, que são 12 classes, mas só 6 vão estar no lançamento.
Ultimate tank with a Juggernaut, lean into blind rage with the Berserker, or Chieftain, which is more about dealing lots of element damage alongside your typical totems. So if we were going to separate the two, I could imagine Marauder and Warrior, one being the more physical, bloodthirsty one, and the other being more tribal, like that Chieftain approach to the concept. So the key differences between them will
O Warrior tá mais para guerreiro e o Marauder tá mais para bárbaro. Seria isso, né?
Probably be shown in those ascendancies. It's just a question of what went to the Warrior and what went to the Marauder. Next, we have our pure dexterity classes though, Ranger and the Huntress. For the Ranger, we have that perfect kiter who can fight from far while dealing massive AoE damage if we look at PoE 1. Leaning into the bow concept, you fire off volleys of arrows, weave in lots of element damage like lightning to enhance that, while relying on your great mobility to avoid damage or position the enemies for a maximum output, while playing at medium or further range generally. If you focus more on single target blasts, or instead lean into poison for damage over time, you can find completely different systems to manage and playstyles there. So if you like the idea of being a classic ranger, this is probably a great starting class for you. On the other hand, for the pure dex option, we have the Huntress, who actually focuses on spears to begin with. With a smaller shield as a defensive tool, you're actually going to be lining up foes for kind of penetrating spear throws. This will be a mix of up close or distance fighting though, because you can still use it as an effective melee weapon, kind of bouncing in close or far away based on the setup. We've seen combinations of fast thrusts chained together, leaps back, and then potent spear throws that can weave in different elements like lightning or fire. The lightning was shown to split and spread, spread, while the fire was kind of waving out from the center of the throw. The leaps that get you in or out also seem to benefit the class for perks of being in close for a period of time, then away, then in, then out, not spending too long either way. That brings us to pure intelligence classes though, those being the Witch and the Sorceress. Starting with the Witch then, we have the Occult Minion User. That's like your pure Summoner class concept. And in particular for theme though, this is a Necromancer.
Cara, a Witch, que é a bruxa, é o Necromancer, né? A princípio seria a classe que eu jogaria, foi a classe que eu joguei no Diablo 2, foi a classe que eu joguei no Diablo 4. Eu adoro Necromancer, mas eu jogo tanto com Necromancer que eu tava pensando em testar uma coisa diferente.
So the undead variety. The core concept here will be to summon armies of dead, empowering them, playing like a tactician yourself around the battlefield, rather than being the main source of damage directly. Now, interestingly, the Witch is also
jogar como tático no campo de batalha é porra nenhuma. Você vai summonando esqueleto e eles fazem todo o trabalho enquanto fica rindo lá atrás.
Defined by a second resource system beyond mana called Spirit. And we spend that to summon, basically. Therefore, the more Spirit you have, the more summons you can have out at one time. These seem to be straightforward in concept at first look, tanky warriors, mages, archers, and more. Thankfully though, there's real quality of life for the summons, allowing you to have direct control over them for skills and movement options. They also revive themselves, they'll summon automatically, on top of even more temporary summons you can work in on top of those. So man, Diablo 4, please learn something.
Era o que eu tava pensando. É tudo que não tem no Necromancer do Diablo 4. Resummoning automático.
Class though is of course the Sorceress. I think this will hit for any pure spellcaster enjoyer, weaving between the classic elements of lightning, fire, and ice, as well as chaos, dealing the damage directly yourself. PoE 1 would have you turn to Witch originally for this idea, but now we have the Sorceress, we can separate them, having Witch being more of a summoner. So I really like how they've separated them in this way. Interestingly though, as shown a while back, the specific staffs that you have can have spells tied to them, allowing for free casts instead of having to manually get in there with your weak little stick when you're out of mana. With the dual specialization concept though, they use the Sorceress to show off that concept. The player would use one staff to freeze and set up the foe, then swap to another staff to suddenly have your skill tree swap and your skills be more lightning based, to work in unison, swapping between the mid-fight kind of setup and spend. Very cool stuff. That brings us though to the hybrid classes, which have their main attributes balanced between two. That could be Strength and Dex, Intelligence and Dex, and then finally Strength and Intelligence. Let's start with Strength and Dex for this then, with my first class in PoE 1, the Duelist. The Duelist was classically using a sword and shield, or a two-handed one, or dual wielding, like a Roman gladiator feel.
Essa classe eu acho que não tá no lançamento.
Able to dish out cleave attacks while swapping stances for maybe better AoE or potential bleed focuses. Now unfortunately this is one of the four we've not seen a lot of in PoE 2, but again I expect similar vibes for this one.
Pô, bem legal, mas
that's not going to
ele tá mostrando
a lot
imagem
hits directly to the face,
Patch of
so
Exile
you'll
1
move
porque não
faster,
tem
you'll
muito.
attack faster, you'll manage the fight. If we consider the original ascendancies, you pick between Slayer, Gladiator and Champion. Champion would use banners and a taunt system to control the fight. Gladiators would use kind of bleed focus playstyles for damage over time, while Slayer will be max offense, surviving through leech while dealing big hits through crits. Compared to that, we have our new class, the Mercenary, as the other hybrid Strength and Dex. A super cool concept here though, of using a mix of different crossbows and grenades to set up and manage situations. With a variety of crossbow types to use, you have different firing modes for every situation, like machine gun fire, sniping with penetrating shots, explosions with the underbarrel launch grenades, or the hilarious shotgun crossbow. In its highlight video, they also focused on another new mechanic, which is WASD movement, while using the mouse to actually aim instead of click to move. This allows you to carefully position and move and aim and fire at the same time. So move in close and aim with the shotgun to spread into a pack, or drag them back in a line to snipe through them with a penetrating sniper shot. On top of the weapons, you also have different ammos and attachments, be that different elements or armor-piercing shots. So as an example they gave us, they would freeze foes and then swap to armor-piercing shots to shatter them. So you want to outthink the situation, maximize your damage based on what you're facing. That's the Mercenary. Next up then, we have the Intelligence and Dex hybrids.
Pô, parece interessante Mercenário. Pior que eu joguei, mas eu não gostei muito quando eu joguei. Mas também, como eu falei, eu tava jogando no computador sem o controle.
That's Shadow and Monk. Now, unfortunately, we've seen little of Shadow, so we look to the original in PoE 1 again as a mix of daggers and traps. It's an assassin concept to bounce in and around a fight, never trying to tank the hits. Looking back at the original ascendancies then, we have Assassin, Saboteur, and Trickster. Basically big bursts through crit, leaning into your traps and explosives, or going into damage over time. No matter what, you'll be super agile, high damage, and somewhat made of paper. So fast-paced, clever gameplay, that's Shadow. On the other hand, we have Monk. Grab your quarterstaff and weave in a surprising amount of element-based setup and spend, freezing enemies to shatter them, or using marks to execute low-health enemies instantly. That then builds up charges to enhance the power of your abilities, adding new effects to them. You're mobile with a lot of control over your enemies, while building up that potent power to unleash at the right time. The mobility seems baked into a lot of the abilities, letting you close the gap pretty much instantly. So that should be important then while you're managing the enemies, to then suddenly appear next to one that's low, execute it, and power up the next setup even more. So a master of yourself and the elements. Finally, we have our last two classes, and the last hybrid type, Strength and Intelligence. For that, we can start with the classic concept, the Druid, a shapeshifter that turns into different forms to deal physical, powerful damage, while becoming, say, tankier, if not as tanky as the warrior type, the bear, while casting spells that will revert you to the human form, to weave in some elemental, ranged help that's pretty cool in terms of the setup, but also really cool in the way that it automatically shapeshifts you based on the type of ability you're about to use. So if you press a bear ability, you'll automatically turn into a bear. It's all nature-based though, so for the spells, we've got earth-related stuff like quakes and volcanoes, alongside your classic lightning. We saw a lot of the tanky bear for swipes and slams, charges, reliable AoE CC, and even some little wolf summons if you want to go more companion-based route. The thing is, in teased footage, they've only really shown the bear form, so we do expect others, we just haven't seen them. But as a cool bit of synergy, we've seen how the human form can open up little volcanoes, and then you've got the earth-shaking slams of the bear to reactivate them over and over. As another detail, we had it explained that the bear rage mechanic causes brighter and brighter runes to glow on the form of the bear, increasing your damage the more you attack with bear skills back to back. So that hints to me maybe a shapeshift focus build could be a concept too. But either way, I think this hits the nail on the head for the Druid fantasy in a way that I find, say, Diablo 4's just doesn't. But for class number 12, we refer now to a classic, the Templar, your paladin type, as another mix of strength and intelligence. Unfortunately, is another with little to see of, but again, an original class does mean we can assume a lot from the original version PoE 1.
Cara, o Templar vai chegar primeiro no Path of Exile do que no Diablo 4. Isso é vergonhoso.
What we do see then is a heavy armor user wielding a shield and a fun weapon, the flail. But looking back to the original ascendancies, that'll tell us a lot. So there we had Inquisitor, the Hierophant, and the Guardian, allowing for element or holy based focuses, auras to benefit the group, able to stand on its own or be really helpful to the team. So very simply, it's a classic paladin with a caster, aura, or tanky nature to consider between. But there you have it. That's our known roster of classes and the general base concepts and details of each. We're going to have a lot of new information coming out regularly in the lead up to release, even this week as I make this video. So expect lots of coverage into the lead up of the launch and after here at Rage Gaming. Until next time then, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Cara, qual que eu achei interessante para jogar? Guerreiro, Bruxo, Sorcerer e Monge. Eu tô entre essas quatro. Eu acho que eu vou começar com Monge. Só para dar uma diferenciada. Tô pensando em começar com Monge para fazer uma coisa diferente. Bora todo mundo de bruxo. Bruxa, né? Eu vou pesquisar mais. Mas vendo isso aqui, eu acho que eu fico entre essas quatro mesmo. Guerreiro, Bruxa, Sacerdote e Monge. Ficar entre essas quatro. Vocês, qual que vocês acharam mais legal? Qual que vocês pretendem jogar?